Trish Bodie.
Here.
Gloria Gonzalez Delakia.
Here.
Alexis Grimes.
Here.
Aaron Johnson. Jim McKay.
Here.
Christine Maurer. Christine Maurer.
Here.
Anna Smith.
Here. All right, with a quorum present, I now call our special meeting on December 3rd of the Leander ISD Board of Trustees to order. We will proceed first to citizen comments, but I don't have the list of sign-ups. I'm looking quickly, so give me a second while I check. Kara Owens? All right, you are our speaker this evening, so we are moving on to this part of the agenda. Please note this format is not going to be a conversation, so it's not a back and forth discussion. We'll ask that your comments respect that fact, and as such, please refrain from directing any comments about an individual by name who would not be able to respond. Our board operating procedures enumerates further requests, but I'll sum up by saying we encourage polite and professional conduct. You have up to 3 minutes to address the Board of Trustees, and we'll hear a chime when your 3 minutes are up.
Good evening. Recess and playgrounds contribute significantly in aiding the physical development of children, but also help to improve their social, emotional, and cognitive skills. It's a critical part of educating the whole child. The 2017 bond allocated money to Mason Elementary for improvements to their playground. Their playground currently includes 2 playgrounds, 1 4-square grid, a basketball court, swings, and a field. And this is a pretty typical playground for the district. 3 of these things require balls. Many elementary schools do not have balls accessible to children unless they are bringing them themselves, and so they're not exactly usable unless a child has specifically brought a ball to use on these. And the district currently has no guidance on how balls are provided, replenished, or who takes ownership over them. PTAs and O's are supplying balls, ADA accessible swings, playground shade covers, tracks, gaga pits, jump ropes, swings, amongst many other playground equipment. Our playgrounds need more options in order to optimize the recess benefits. They don't give a wide range of opportunities for kids to play. We need more concrete in order to paint games like hopscotch, chutes and ladders, obstacle courses, more 4-square and 9-square. We need tetherball, games and equipment that are accessible to children in wheelchairs or with sensory processing disorders. We need more concrete so that when there has been rain the day previously, the kids can still go outside and play. Currently, a lot of schools are implementing indoor recess when there's been rain the previous day because there's not enough concrete for the kids to play on and they just track mud inside. Mason has a little over $100,000 left in the money allocated for outdoor improvements from the 2017 bond. I would like to propose that instead of reallocating this extra money to other projects, that you look at this as an opportunity to explore a more varied and vibrant playground design, something that could be implemented at schools across the district eventually, and as a new template as we build new schools with playgrounds. When was the last time we evaluated our playground design? I think that this is a great opportunity for us to look at that and to think about how we can create opportunities for kids to really optimize this time because their brains need it. And their research shows that when they have an optimal recess experience, that they perform better and they pay attention and that there are less behavioral disturbances during the day. So please consider that this is a great opportunity for us to explore what a better playground template could look like. Thank you.
Thank you very much. concludes our citizen comments. We'll move on to our discussion items. For the bond workshop this evening, I believe the first item we have on here is the TASBO management review.
Good evening, and Trish, just a note, we're going to go through the whole presentation that includes agenda item number 1 and everything else, so we won't take each item specifically.
Okay, so A, B, C, D, and E. If you're following the leader, you're going to see all those items.
All that information, all in one.
Tremendous, thank you. So,
good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for being here tonight. I think this might be the first joint meeting between the Board of Trustees and the Bond Advisory Committee. So I appreciate you taking time out of your evening and helping us with this process. So before we get started, let's just answer a couple of questions. Why are we here? I'm sure many of you asked that question when you saw this meeting invite on your calendar. As you know, Dr. Gearing and I have been in the district for just a little over a year now, and one of our first quests was to understand the district's bond program. As a fast-growth district, bonds and construction are a large part of Leander ISD operations. And for me personally, as the CFO, this is an area that I needed to get up to speed on quickly. I soon learned that we had several accounts with funds that were sold several years ago, and I wanted to focus on getting those funds spent. And to better understand what was really remaining and to get a clear understanding of how to move forward, we decided to bring TASBO in last spring to perform a review of the bond funds and provide an independent review and assessment. And for those of you that aren't familiar, TASBO is the Texas Association of School Business Officials and provides support for districts in an array of areas. So tonight, in summary, that report showed that as of last June, there was just over $18 million in cash remaining from the 2007 bond, and some of the projects were remaining. So the purpose tonight is to talk about that report and look at the findings and examine those dollars that are left. And so what is the expected outcome? That brings us to why we're here tonight. We've looked at our options for expending those remaining cash balances and discussed the best process for using those funds with bond and tax counsel through Norton Rose Fulbright. And so we're here tonight to discuss the process the district needs to use to close out these remaining funds. And in the true spirit of transparency, Dr. Gearing and I thought it would be best to bring these two groups together and discuss the plan going forward. So tonight is not about looking at specific projects and the status of those, or to even discuss what to do with the project savings from the 17 bond. All those discussions will happen in future meetings as we move forward with the Bond Advisory Committee and then take recommendations to the board. So we're really here about what do we do with these excess dollars and make sure everyone understands the process.
Elaine, quick question.
Yes.
You said we have about $18 million left of unexpended bonds from 07, is that correct?
Yes.
Is that unsold bonds, or is that cash on hand that we have in a bank somewhere?
That is cash on hand in various bank accounts, and you're going to see that in a few minutes.
Got it, thank you.
Any other questions before we get started? Okay, so that brings us to our agenda tonight. Number 1, we are going to review the TASBO management report. The board has seen this report a few months ago and should be familiar with those contents, but we wanted to share that with the Bond Advisory Committee. We are going to review those funds remaining from 2007 and even prior to that, and then discuss how we spend those and get rid of that cash. And then the status of the 2017 bond program through a review of the bond status report, and then talk about steps moving forward. So with that, let's dive into the TASBO review. There were 8 findings and recommendations in that report. And so let's look at what those were and what we are doing about them. So recommendation number 1 starts on page 9 of the report, and it's concerning the management of construction funds within a single fund per authorization. So the report said the district should consider a different accounting method that focuses on budgeting, accounting, and managing cash within a single fund for each authorization. This does not preclude effective cash management, but rather simplifies budgeting. So the process has been Each sale is a new fund, and so one project might span across 3 funds with 3 separate budgets, and so it's very tedious from an accounting standpoint. The second recommendation and finding was using one bank account versus individual accounts. So again, on page 9, talks about having separate bank accounts requires staff to spend time reconciling all those banks. And so we would keep the proceeds separate through investment accounts, but write all checks out of one rather than having multiple checking accounts. Finding number 3 is about one person establishing account codes, and this is about the manner in which account codes are established. So previously you could have multiple people setting up account codes, which is how we track projects, and so different segments of the account code might have meant one thing to one person and something else to another, and so getting some consistency in that so that we can truly track all of the dollars. Finding number 4 and recommendation number 4 was develop a process to capitalize project management costs. So on page 9 and 10, this recommendation is discussed, and the district uses in-house project managers to oversee the projects, and those costs are funded out of interest earnings. But we're not capitalizing those costs back to the projects that are being worked on. So there are some implications with the IRS on this area, and so the recommendation was to take those costs and then add them back to the project. The next one is to draw down funds remaining from pre-07. So from sales prior to the 2007 authorization, we have $169,000 just sitting in an account. So that cash needs to be spent. Closely to that, we have funds from the 07 authorization. As of today, that unencumbered cash balance is just over $16 million. These are funds that were sold from 2008 to 2014. And so the recommendation was to first identify uncommitted project needs, establish a deadline for the use of those funds, and then the recommendation was to use all of the funds by the end of this current fiscal year. And so that's why we're here tonight to talk about the process to do that. Finally, on page 13, need a system to track all project budget resources and commitments and expenditures so that we have a system of tracking budget increases and decreases. And so we'll talk about what that system will look like. And then the last recommendation on page 15, as I mentioned, the project management costs are being funded out of interest income, but the alignment of the income and the expenses could be refined. And so the recommendation was to possibly set up a separate fund to record those program management costs and then allocate those back at year end to clear out that fund. And again, as I noted, there are some IRS implications of not capitalizing these project costs. So what is our response to this? So the first 3, a single fund, a single bank account, and one person. One person is in charge of account codes now, and that has been the practice for, Jimmy, probably 3 years. And so since the 17 authorization has been in use, that is the system. So currently now as we sell new money, it is going in a separate investment account, but we're not opening additional checking accounts for those funds. And we will be using one accounting system as we moved into the new ERP. The next recommendation, capitalizing the management costs, we are now going to be doing that for this fiscal year. In fact, talked to bond counsel this afternoon and setting up a call after the first of the year so that we can go through the process of that, and have been talking to the external auditors about how that gets done. The cash balances that remain, we're going to talk about that this evening, and so that recommendation will be finalized. The recommendation to adopt a project reporting system we have done through these bond status reports, and we've given these to the board, I believe, 2 or 3 months now, and so this is now in conjunction with our new ERP that uses project accounting. That is our way to better track the projects and the budgets. And for me personally, this is my Bible now of where's the money, how does it stand, and knowing exactly where it is. And then again, tied back to the capitalization of the project management cost, we're now tracking investment earnings separately along with those project costs, so we know at any time how much of interest is left for those costs. So any questions on the management report before we move into talking about the excess funds?
You mentioned that we were tracking the project management cost as well. Are they going to be
They're at the bottom of that page. So under the turquoise
I see.
bar,
There it is. Thank you.
is the second line.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so the first area that we really want to talk about is this drawdown of funds. And as I said, our main purpose this evening is transparency on how we plan to use the remaining cash that's been generated from project savings and interest income. So why do we have cash remaining from '07? Well, this is a good thing that we have project savings. So the projects that have been completed have come in and left excess funds, and we have interest income that hasn't been used completely towards these project management costs. So to understand the why, we need to understand that there are several implications tied to issuing tax-exempt bonds. So first of all, when tax-exempt bonds are issued, there's a reasonable expectation that those funds are going to be spent within 3 years. Well, 3 years is a really tight time frame, and we know that most districts never spend all their money within 3 years. Typically, it's 5 years or even longer, as the case here. But after 3 years, there's additional yield restriction calculations that are triggered and increases the risk of arbitrage. And what arbitrage is the rule that an entity may not issue bonds tax-free and then use those proceeds to earn money or earn interest on that's at a higher yield than what you borrowed the money. So the federal government doesn't want you borrowing money and then making money on the money that they're not collecting any taxes on. So it makes sense, right? So we need to get on a first in, first out system where we use our cash first before we go into the new cash. So the first step is using those remaining '07 and just getting caught up. And the way we need to do that is to pay current invoices. So as you imagine, our current invoices are related to 2017 bond projects. So how do we use the '07 cash to do 2017 projects? So under Texas Education Code, section 451105 talks about the use of unspent general bond proceeds. And the code says a district may use unspent proceeds for the specific purpose for which the bonds were authorized. So if all the authorized purposes are complete, meaning everything is finished and money is left, then what do you do? So then with the remaining funds, you can use that to retire the bonds or for other purposes with certain requirements. But I want to stop and focus on what does specific purposes mean. Under the new law, and I believe this was the last legislative session or the one prior, districts are now required to have separate propositions for certain things. So if we were to go to bond for an athletic stadium, now it has to be a separate proposition. So the cash for that in the future that would be remaining would have to go through this process of a public meeting. The money that we're talking about is the '07 prior to this law. And so the specific purpose in this case goes back to the election order and the bond order. And that language says for the construction, acquisition, and equipment of school buildings. So that would cover the use of projects approved by the Bond Advisory Committee and the Board of Trustees. So this current language, the specific purpose, is very narrow under new money, under new bond authorization, but doesn't necessarily apply to this. So the money that we're talking about is renovations, maintenance, construction, equipping. That makes sense? So The district does have full flexibility in using these remaining funds from '07. So let's look at what we have. So I mentioned earlier we have $169,000, almost $170,000 of cash from pre-07 authorization. And as you can see here, it's split among 3 different bank accounts, 3 different funds. And so each month, these are 3 bank accounts we're reconciling. And so we want to just get rid of this cash and be done with it. And the issues here again, arbitrage, time consuming, and the funds need to be spent. Then when we look at the money from the '07 issues from 2008 to 2014, you now see we have 7 accounts with various balances, one with as little as $272 that we're tracking every month. Again, this is time consuming, arbitrage concerns, and I'll just footnote that these were our unencumbered cash balances as of November. So remember, this is cash. Cash does not reflect any outstanding bills or encumbrances. So as we move through the next slides, don't confuse this 18 with the budget balances. So let's look at what's really left from the '07 authorization, what those projects are, and the status of those. So you can see in the first column, this beginning balance, this was the balance of the funds remaining in the budget as of July 1. And those are all of the projects under '07 that still have money tied to them. The next column represents what we've spent or paid out since July 1 that would not be reflected in that beginning balance. And then we do have 1.6 million of encumbrances in that third column. So this would represent POs that have been issued and are awaiting payment. And then finally, the ending balance. And it's the ending balance here that we're really wanting to deal with. So if we carry that 16,772 forward, so this is the balances that we're dealing with. So the Flex Labs, the first item here, that project was done with other funds. We still have it earmarked, so we don't need the money here anymore. So I've moved that over to the project savings line, which is going to go into that holding bucket. Now, a footnote here, part of this money has been allocated towards the purchase of the warehouse science materials land. The board has had many conversations about that land and where those funds were coming from. The next item, we still have some money left for the Glenn High School template. So that money we're putting in the reappropriate out of 17. And so those are devices for that high school. If all that money is used, then it would be used under 17. If part of it is saved, it would move to the project savings. We have a small amount from an HVAC project, so I've moved that over to project savings. That is done. A small amount on the Danielson template. Again, assuming that that is all finished, that is being moved over to savings. We still have money allocated for land, elementary sites. We need to keep that money, but we don't need the cash for that money. So we're saying we'll use that cash, pay for current invoices, and then reallocate budget in 17 so that we still have the money for land. So the budget doesn't go away, just the cash. And then the next item is funds for a disaster recovery site. Again, that's an IT thing that still need the money for, so keeping that reappropriated. Same thing with the South Satellite Transportation Center, reappropriate those funds. This next item is that Warehouse Science Material Center. So we have a little bit of an overage in our budget worksheet. We initially allocated $100,000. I think we've spent $198, so that's coming out of that whole $2 million that's being allocated to that project. We already have identified just under $2.9 million of savings that is sitting in a savings bucket. And then we have $500,000 reserved in case interest revenues don't cover the project management cost. And the reason that is interest rates have plummeted in the last, almost a year, so we want to make sure we have funds to cover that, so there's a small reserve. So at the end of the day, of this 16.7 million budget remaining, we would reappropriate about 11 million of that within the 17 funds, and then our project savings bucket would grow to the 5.9, which is already funding the land, and then we would be deciding how to spend that in future conversations. So a visual of that, we take this 16 million of unencumbered cash, we use it to pay Tarvin Elementary invoices because that's the biggest project we have going on that would fully consume this cash by the end of the fiscal year. And then that would free up 17 cash and budget to be reappropriated for those items that we just looked at. So, any questions about what we just talked about? The next step was to walk you through these bond status sheets, and so I will pause there before we do that and see if there are any questions.
Just a clerical question for me. Where can I find a copy of the slides that you reviewed? I don't think those have been loaded to Board Book yet.
What you have is what was loaded last Friday. The only thing I changed was some colors.
It's on item number 3. I just pulled it up if you're following the leader, but it's discussion items 3, bond workshop. If you click on that item,
Okay.
look and let me know if that's not what you're thinking.
Yeah, I think it was user error when I downloaded the agenda and all the attachments, but I see it there.
Anything else?
Yeah, Elaine, so I appreciate the digging in and figuring out what we have and where it's from. But, and I've said this before in previous bond discussions, what we're looking at right now is $16.7 million that we basically oversold our taxpayers back in 2007. And it could very well be that we were able to get construction and get things done with a savings. But at the end of the day, we went to the public and said, you know, we're gonna put this on your tax bill to have this money so we can do these projects. And I understand the advantage and what the opportunity is here, but it feels a little disingenuous to me that we're going to take these funds that ultimately we didn't need to complete the projects that we told the public that we needed the money for. The projects seem to have gotten completed anyway. And now we're going to use that money, it's kind of a shell game, and now we're going to push out 2017 bond funds, which all we're doing is kicking that over ask of our taxpayers. Is there a method by which, and I'm sure digging into this, most of those 20 or 2007 bonds were in cabs. I don't know how many of those still remain, but while we're sitting on $18 million of cash, that cab bond is accruing interest at an obscene rate. What do we do to take this extra money that we didn't need ultimately and pay back some of that debt?
So Jim, the more proper thing to do, and I just want to clarify, these savings are normal because you would hope that you have project savings as you complete projects, and during the time the district had these funds, interest rates were much better than they are today, so we were able to generate great interest income on these funds. The better solution is now that we spend this cash, we either delay sales of the remaining 17 authorization, or we don't end up selling as much as we need to finish the 17 bonds.
Okay. So that's the answer that I was looking for. So we haven't sold everything. So we have, at the end of the day, we have the ability to go back to our taxpayers and say, hey, you know what? Because of this, these savings from previous bonds, and we've done our business so wonderfully, we don't need as much of the money as we thought we did when we went to and asked for a bond to begin with. So And I get that, you know, every district probably is looking to have savings, and there may be a little bit of padding built into some of these pricing models. But is it normal to have this much money sitting in an account for 13 years?
That is not normal. It is not unusual to have this money, but for this long is not normal. And so that's what we're trying to clean up. And now it'll be a lot easier for me to determine when do we need to do our next sale out of 17. And remember, there's more to that decision than just how much money do we need. Is the interest rate environment great? Do we want to take advantage of that? But it's also an opportunity to address current needs within the district so that the next authorization could be shortened by, you've already taken care of some needs, now you don't have to ask for as many new bonds in the future by managing the current funds that we have.
Right, and I don't want to hijack the conversation, so I'll wrap up with this final question. When we went to the public and said we need X amount of money for these projects, if we decide now that we want to do something other than what we originally articulated to the public, is that proper? Hey, we needed all of this money because we needed to do this, but hey, we have the savings, so now we want to use that money and do something else with it. Is that proper, ethical, and or legal?
That is completely legal and proper, again, through the bond order and the election data. The bonds were drafted to be construct, equip, renovate school buildings, and so that gives you wide flexibility on how you use those funds. And so, you know, as we get to the end of what do we do next, that's where, as we have projects closed out and we know we have savings, let's identify what the district needs are and take care of those. You know, we've got major maintenance needs, we've got playground needs, we've got lots of needs, so let's start knocking those out before they get more expensive and not have to do more bonds for those.
Got it. All right, I appreciate that clarification. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else?
Yes, if I could take us back to slide 8, I think, depending on how forward one. There we go. So as I looked at the sort of 3 options here, the 3 paths, the first is obviously straightforward enough, specific purposes of the bond authorization or the election. The second also makes sense to me, and these kind of make sense to me in priority order, if you will. And then the third is redirecting those funds to another purpose. And so while there is a process to do that, I want to make sure that before we go through that process, we're all 100% comfortable with that process. I think there are some potential risks, and there are some qualifying criteria that we might look at before we go fully down the path identified in 3. There are some, mitigating or associated circumstances we might consider, like, is the purpose significantly different from the purpose that was originally authorized? How many years have transpired since that authorization was given? Factors like that, to me, seem relevant for us to consider before we presume to go down the path of option number 3. And I would say that for me, option 2 is very attractive in the sense that we keep the purpose of those funds attached to what the voters have authorized, and we simply use the same authorized funds to pay down the debt for those items that have been approved and have been constructed at less cost to the taxpayer than was originally anticipated. So in my mind, I think it merits spending just a little time talking about how we process these options and where we want to focus our attention. So I don't know if you have any additional comments there or if other board members have thoughts or comments about that, but I think there's some additional discussion to have there.
Aaron, I agree with you. That's kind of where I was going with that. Taking that extra money and paying down that debt, because we are creating a lot of interest.
I'm curious on precedent, and board, please help me if we can layer this conversation. But when a land purchase came before us, this was what we said we were planning to do. In the structure, we didn't want to retire the bond with the flex money. We said we were using the land, so we had already made that. So I feel like we already kind of made that precedent in history based on the information we had at the time. It's okay if you're like, no, now we want to change that or we want to have a discussion. I just want to make sure I understand. I mean, this isn't out of left field. We've already kind of given this direction, I feel like, to admin in a way. So, and still the conversation can go. I just want to make sure we're clear, because I feel like we're muddling it a bit.
Well, I don't disagree with you in terms of prior precedent. I think what I'm seeing in this review is an opportunity to look at our processes and say, is that precedent the one that we want to continue to follow, or is there a better path? And so that's, I think, where some of my questions are coming from. But I'm curious what other board members think.
Well, and I want to remind the group that tonight we're discussing the excess cash. We need to have many more conversations about what we do with remaining bond funds, because not only do you have this, we've already got substantial savings in the 17, and so we need to weigh all of the savings that we have with the entire district needs, and then is it better to pay off debt with this? Is it better to knock out some of the needs so that we don't have to go for as large of an election the next time, because we are still going to grow and we are going to need future bonds. And so there's a lot of discussion and decisions that need to go in that. But at this point right now, on Thursday night, you don't have all the data to make those decisions.
And I like what you mentioned as well, is as we move forward, another option, do you spend on projects that you were going to go to get bonds for them, so you don't have to go as frequently to the public to do a bond if you're using your money wisely.
Right.
So I think those are all good discussions. So then for tonight, we're looking at, let's just make sure I stay on the same page too on the board as well. We're looking at the cash encumbrances that we have from 2007. And you're saying right now, you don't feel like a discussion of if we should use those funds to retire a bond is appropriate at this time, because why?
Because we need to get this cash out the door, and to do that, to retire bonds, isn't as simple as me just writing a check to whomever to pay those bonds off.
That helps me kind of,
we've got to go through the defeasance process or a refunding, and so the cash needs to go. And so the cash needs to be spent for current invoices. That's going to free up 2017 cash, and then we'll start discussing, okay, because you're going to have more savings. Right now we're going to have $3 million in savings after we pay for the land, but now we've got savings from Larkspur because it was funded with the other money. And then we're going to have savings from these projects that we close out. And so it's going to be a bigger discussion. What do we do with this? And so that's not what we're prepared to get into tonight.
So Elaine, this is about kind of catching us up, like we're wrapping up something. And when I looked at the TASBO report, first of all, thank y'all for doing the TASBO report. I think Jimmy and Elaine doing this is phenomenal, because we might have operated under one assumption, but doing this report gives us some really solid best practices moving forward. I feel more confident after reading this and looking at the changes that y'all have made, that we are doing well moving forward, that we are going to be doing the best we can with taxpayer dollars. I really appreciate the changes that we've done to do this. And I also noticed, and I guess I'll go ahead and do it because I know we have more discussion, but the report points out that the district staff really helped do this, and I see Leslie's name in here, and also wanted to do a shout out, because really the information that you're bringing to us as a result of many, many, many hours, days, weeks work. So thank y'all very much, because I think this is a really good discussion. How do we get caught up? And now, how do we do best practices moving forward? So thank y'all.
Yes, and I will echo that. Shout out to Ms. Leslie. She has worked extremely hard, not only on this report, but getting everything converted into the new project accounting system, which is quite different than just normal debits and credits. And in the end, it's going to make her life a lot easier, but she will be dancing a jig when we get this money gone.
Just a quick follow-up, if I can go back to the earlier dialogue we were having a moment ago, Elaine. I understood your response to suggest that, and I agree, the purpose of our conversation tonight is not to decide if we're going to propose use of funds for Project A or Project B. But I think it maybe misses my initial point, which is, for me, the question is, should we be in that space to begin with? Do we want to choose to be in that space to begin with these funds? Or should we be in the space of considering retiring bonds for those projects with those funds first? And so I want to make sure that I understand, you do think it's appropriate for us to have that level of conversation here tonight, or are you suggesting that's not also appropriate for tonight?
I don't know that that's even an option at this point. I mean, the question on the table is, how do we spend the cash that's in the bank? And bond counsel has said the best way to do that is to pay current projects. So what that means, in our 17 authorization of our unsold money, maybe we don't sell 18 million of it. Or I don't know why you would sell 18 million and then turn around and pay debt with it. So you just don't issue as much. So you don't issue additional debt. So in effect, our best bet is defeasance and refunding. So retiring debt, although it's illegal, it's a little bit more complicated than just doing that. Now, if you're going to have unissued authorization, why would you go to bond again? So,
yeah, I don't think anybody's suggesting that we should issue bonds so that we can retire the bonds. That doesn't make any sense, right?
no.
And so the question then is, if we have authority to issue bonds for money that we haven't issued yet, should we exercise that authority for projects different from what the voters specifically approved?
And that's the legitimate question.
And then let's set that aside for a second. We do have funds in the bank that are unspent, and are unrelated to current construction projects. Is that correct? Those are at least that description is at least applicable to the pre-2007 funds, correct?
The funds under either authorization would be allowable under either, because they were written under the construct, equip school facilities. So the specific purpose language that you're seeing here would apply to new authorizations for a specific performing arts center, athletic field, anything that legally has to be specified separately.
So this is an important clarification or understanding, I think. You're not actually suggesting pursuing option 3 here.
No, not at all.
You're talking about pursuing option 1, but you're saying that the specific purposes are the same, even though they, I would argue, they may not be clearly the same, because we may be talking about land for an elementary school that was never contemplated 12 or 13 or 14 years ago or whatever, when the voters approved a particular bond. And so I think maybe I'm hung up on the language of specific purposes, and I'm thinking of tying that to a particular election item, right? And that language and the expectations that we create with our voters when we present that bond authorization, and making sure that what we spend those funds for matches what we presented to the voters.
Right. And so both authorizations have that broad, specific language, purpose language. In this code, that specific purpose is applying to new authorizations under the new law. So whether you did land in '07 or '17, it's the same purpose. It doesn't matter if it's different sites. So as we start managing the 17 authorization, we've got quite a bit of money for land. Do we need this many elementary sites? And then if the board decides we don't, and we don't want to do that, then either we don't sell that amount of money going forward, or you don't have to do option 3. The board and the BAC decide, okay, we're not going to use the money for land, but we're going to use it for XYZ instead. But XYZ would still qualify under the bond authorization language.
Okay. So I appreciate the clarification. I think it's important that we come to a mutual understanding on our use of that language, the legal interpretation of that language. I think maybe I'm suggesting a higher order commitment to our voters than just same purpose or same general purpose based on the general language. So that's something that is in the back of my mind as we look at what we may consider doing in our current situation.
And Aaron, that's front of mind for me, and that's part of what I was trying to suggest. When we went through the last bond, go ahead, Bruce.
No, finish your thought, please, Jim.
So when we went through the last bond process, we broke it down by what is safety related, what is school related, and then what are the luxuries that people wish they could have. We had 3 separate, I mean, we went through a very detailed and several meetings to decide exactly which projects we were going to ask the voters for bonds for. That was a big deal. That was us really trying to connect with our constituents and with the residents, saying, these are the specific projects, this is why they're important, and this is why we're asking for the money. Now, I understand that in the section 45-1105, they paint that with a broad stroke, saying if it is for construction of new buildings. I get that, but we didn't say that to the taxpayer. So to Aaron's point and to mine, it is a little disingenuous to say, well, we're following the law here, but we're not really following the covenant we made with the taxpayers. That's my rub.
Yeah, so if I may, just some clarifications. Number one, we're not asking to spend this money on anything else right now. All we're saying is that, number one, this money's been sitting in a bank account for a very long period of time, and we need to resolve that issue. This is a way of getting that money out of cash and into the 2017 authorization in a way that doesn't spend it yet, but allows the 2017 authorization to decide how that money gets spent. The benefit of that is that it brings it in front of the Bond Advisory Committee and the board for decision as to how those funds get spent. The second thing is and we've run into this already at board discussions, is that the accounting for prior 2007, 2006 bonds is very complicated because of the way that it's allocated amongst bank accounts. By bringing this forward, it makes it much more simple for us to track all of that money and to paint that picture clearly for the board and the Bond Advisory Committee so that we can make those effective decisions in a very transparent way for our community going forward. So we have accomplished everything we said we would accomplish to the public when the district issued those 2006 and 2007 bonds. And we're not saying we're going to spend that money on anything else. We are saying we're going to find a better way to get that forward so that Bond Advisory, community, and board can help us make those decisions going forward. And that could be paying off bonds. That could be other projects that are legal and that work inside this 451105. But we're not making that decision tonight. We're just making the decision to help clean all of this up so that we can be more transparent and keep track of all of this in one place.
Yeah, and I very much appreciate that, and I certainly don't want you or Elaine or any of the staff to think that I'm in any way calling them out or whatever, for lack of a better term. I very much appreciate the fact that we're finally having this discussion, but I want to make sure that the history of how we ask the public for funds prior to your arrival and Elaine's arrival is well stated. Because that is something that I am sensitive. I don't want to speak for Aaron, but he seems to agree that that this is an area that we need to make sure that we're communicating effectively with the residents. So we've beleaguered. Let's move on with the presentation.
I just want to add that what we're looking at is 2007. The money is there, and I think our responsibility, our fiscal responsibility to our community is to do what's going to save us money. It doesn't make sense for this money to be sitting there. Let's use this money to pay invoices we currently have, and then that gives us the ability to have the conversation on our 2017 bonds of whether we want to go and sell those or not. But this money's already there.
It's there.
It's there. So for us to, I don't think there's any lack of transparency or anything. We saved money. We have this money there. The money's sitting there. For whatever reason, it sat there way too long. That's not, you're doing it all anyway.
Right. I was not here.
She was not
right.
here. And at this point, we owe it to our taxpayers to use this money and to pay invoices with it so that we don't have to then go and call on some of those 2017 bonds. Correct?
Correct. It's going to give us much better information or data as far as when we need to sell again to finish the 17 projects. And if we've got 169 million of authorization approximately, let's say we need 100 million to finish out the 17, and that's all the board wants to do, then we do that, and we leave that 69 million of authorization just sitting there, and it dies, and then you go to the next bond. So it's a much cleaner way to manage our future cash sales because we'll really know, okay, we're about to be out of money. We know we've got this amount of projects left. How much do we need to sell? Versus looking at the budget for those projects and saying, oh, well, it's time to sell for these projects. Well, how much cash do we still have from other things?
And thank y'all again. This is what we need as a board, and we need this for our taxpayers. The way y'all pulled this together, I feel like we're on the right track, so thank you.
So that takes us to this sheet. If you're ready to go there, it'll get a little bit bigger, not a lot. So this is why I provided you handouts. And Jim, Dr. Gehring, I apologize. I didn't virtually send you a handout, but you should have it from what was attached in the board packet. So you have two copies. The first one we're going to start with just says as of November 25th in the top right corner. And so I don't know that I can really point on the screen to make anything meaningful, but this first column then is going to show you those 2007, this is budget, remember, so now we're not cash, we're back to project budgets. So it's that 18,557,000 in that first column of all the projects that we just looked at, what the remaining budget was as of June or July 1st. The second column shows the 2017 bond authorization, and so it ties to that total of 454 million. And then I have a column here where we'll see on the next sheet the transfers out of the 07 into the 17. And then there have been other funds allocated from other sources to these projects to supplement the bond authorization. And those total 31.9 million. So those other funds are part interest, part rebates that we would get on projects. And then I believe part of this other sources is actually '07 budgets that were moved over to supplement the projects here. And then there was money moved from the major maintenance budget over here to supplement Cedar Park High School. So what you see here on the first half, left half of the page at the very bottom, total project budget $504,896. So this is everything all on one page except for that little $169,000 cash balance. So this tells me exactly what our projects are, how much money has been allocated towards them, and then the right-hand side of the page shows the expenditures by year. So going back to 17-18, what was spent that year, and each year the expenditures to date, and then the project encumbrance column is outstanding POs, or what we still know is outstanding on that project. So the other thing we're moving towards is anytime we sign a contract, there's definitely a PO entered, so all of our encumbrances are in the system and we don't lose sight of any retainage payments. So then the final column is your remaining budget, and so that shows you where you are on each project. And so what I like about this, if I don't see a number in the encumbrance column, I can ask myself and Jimmy, is this project done? And if it's done and it's got a small balance, then that's where we get the board to approve closing that out, moving that to the project savings line, and then we know at any one time how much we have in project savings as projects are completed. And then this is sectioned and categorized in the same manner that the projects are that were related to the 17 authorization and shown on the district's website. And then the purpose of the second page that at the top right says after reallocation of funds, this is just to really show you the moving around of those budgets. This will not be a version that we see every month because it's just an illustration. But the first thing I want to draw your attention to is the total project budget highlighted there in orange. You'll notice between the two, the number does not change. We're just moving budgets from one column to the other. So we still have the same amount of money. Nothing went away. It's just in different places. So as we looked earlier, and I'm just going to run back over there, this 18.5 went to 16.7 since July. And so now that 16,700,000 of this 18 million in the first column, you can now see has been put in the budget transfers column that is highlighted in yellow and red. And so those close, so you can see the first one, the Flex Lab, that's closed out. So I'm taking that out. So if you go all the way across, there's now no longer any budget for that. We don't need that. So I'm moving that down to the project savings line. And so you follow that same system through each project. And so now I know on the far right what is remaining, what is left. Again, that budget available didn't go away. It's just moving the funds around. And so now everything would be done under the 17 authorization. That excess cash is gone. And now we can manage going forward. How much do we need to sell? What do we want to do with savings that we have to date? And we're back on a first in, first out basis.
Elaine, I don't know if this is the document for it because this is more about the finance part of it, but I was wondering, is there a way to see on here, though, that a project's actually completed and done? Is it only going to be at a 0 and we know then the project's completed?
From here, you would know through a 0. Jimmy provides a status update report that shows when the CMAR was issued and the other status. And so we want to keep that information on that report because this just gets too cluttered when you try to put everything in here.
And then, so let me just make sure I'm following along, though. In the Glenn High School, remaining Glenn High School template, 762 is still remaining in the budget, so that means that that project is not yet completed.
Right, and that's a project that we really want to start looking at. Can we close this out? We need to spend the money or they don't need it. And so as we manage through that, then these balances will change and you will see the effect of those changes in the project savings unallocated. And then today we even talked about having two lines here, a project savings from '07 and a project savings from '17, so that we keep those separate.
Elaine, in project savings, do we expect there to be a range of savings, and is there going to be a flag for if there's too much savings? Do we go back and look at the process?
You know, that's an interesting question because a lot of it stems from the amount of escalation costs that an architect builds in. So I've worked with many architect firms, and the amount of escalation is what's going to lead to these savings. Of course, there's other factors. You know, steel prices might increase and your projects may all be over budget. So there's a lot of factors that go into those savings. I've not seen any standard of you should expect X amount from a project. I mean, they're also different. They're going to vary. Very common for projects to come in over budget, and then you've got to go back to the drawing board. It's very common for projects to be under budget, and that's what you want, but it's a balancing act of you want to have enough money, but you don't want to have too much money. And so when you do have the luxury of selling in installments, it's a way to marry that cash to the total budget. A lot of districts sell the whole thing at the beginning, and then whatever falls out, and there's no way to manage that, so.
Elaine, can you ask a couple of questions to make sure I'm understanding the individual lines on the second version of this form?
Sure.
So I think if I understand correctly, we'll start simple. Anything in black is unchanged from the prior version of the same sheet, correct?
Correct.
All right, so red indicates lines with changes, yes?
It should, but then I'm looking at one that doesn't look like it changed.
I had that same question. You're looking at the Glen High School line for remaining construction contract?
Yeah, I think I was trying to highlight the things that were related to '07, but maybe I wasn't completely consistent through there. You can see there's some activity. There's still an ending balance there.
Yeah, for the, well, we'll come to that in a second, I guess. Let's take a simple example. You referenced the Flex Labs at Cedar Park High School. We had $3.1 million in authorization for the project. I assume that based on your changes here, we're deciding that not only do we not need those today, but we don't foresee a future state when we're going to need those. And so we're indicating $3.1 million of potential budget transfers and moving those dollars to that column, correct?
That project actually, Aaron, is done. It was done with other funds, so this allocation is no longer needed, so it's coming out of that line item. And then you can't see all of the detail if you look at, I need to put numbers on these lines. Under project management at the very bottom, the project savings unallocated, that 5.9 million is a function of that 3.1. So that 3.1 came out of that project and went into project savings. And then the same thing under the middle school improvements, that HVAC update, that 606 remaining balance, no longer needed. Let's take it out of there, put it in project savings. However, if you look at future elementary land sites, so we took it out of that line from '07, but we're adding it to the 30 million within the 17 authorization. So now within 17, we have 36.7 million available for land purchases. So none of that budget went to the savings line. It got consolidated to the 17 program, increasing the amount you have there for land purchases. And this is that area, if we decide we don't need this many elementary sites, then we reduce that amount from future sales so we don't sell the money for that.
So I'm obviously trying to catch up with you on these sheets, just trying to understand what it all means and make sure I can read them correctly. If a cell is marked in yellow in that budget transfers 2007 authorization column, does that suggest then that those funds have been moved into that project management cell at the bottom?
I believe so. I'm doing the math in my head and it doesn't quite add up. I'd have to go into that cell and see exactly what's in there, but I was trying to show with the highlights just the movement, just of moving the budget out of one into the other, or taking it out completely because it's not needed.
Okay. So coming back to, I guess the focus then is on the rows in red. We talked about that first Glen High School row. It looks like there aren't any changes there, but maybe that was associated with, or associated with the row below because they're both part of the 2007 authorization.
Yeah, there's really no reason for that one to be highlighted in red. We owe a little bit on that contract. We need to pay it, and so it's cash. It just hasn't been paid, so it's in the encumbrance column.
Sorry, which one is that?
That's the Glen Height construction, 408.
But the full amount is encumbered,
Right. So there's not going to be any savings there. That's what's
okay, so
remaining, and that needs to be paid out.
Okay. And then the row below it, we have 763,000 and change in remaining authorization, but we're saying the encumbrances are only 630, and so the balance of that can be transferred.
Well, the balance is staying there for now. That's not been moved. Well, it's been moved, but it's been moved to 17. So it's going to be reserved in 17 until we ascertain it can be completely closed out. And then if it's less than what we need here, then that balance would be moved to project savings.
So when you say it's been moved to 17, how do I see that? How do I track that?
So that's where it's going into the other revenue sources column.
Okay.
And so now when you get your monthly report that looks like this, you'll have the column with the 454 million of authorization, and this other resources column will have the 48,706 because it shows the effect of bringing in any remaining budgets out of the 07 that need to be reserved.
Okay, but the Cedar Park Flex Lab row was different because that wasn't being moved forward on the same row. That was being moved forward to 2017 under project management.
Right, so it's coming down. The others are just moving over.
It's in the same column, but it's on a different row.
Right. So I'm taking it out in the budget authorization column, and then I'm putting it into other revenue sources down under project savings.
Okay.
So it's a function of that 5.9 million.
Okay. I think those are my questions for now. I'll have to do a little more reading before I figure out what's next.
And I don't know if it works for other board members. It helped me to use this slide because that just pulled it all together, and so then I could track it a little easier.
And I really just was showing you how the sausage is made here. I didn't have to show you this, but again, in transparency, I just wanted you to see the in and the out so that when you see this spreadsheet in the future and you're going, how did we get to 48 million in other resources? Where did that money come from? Well, this is where it came from.
This is important to see. Thank you.
So other than going through those and just pointing out that the budgets remaining don't change, the next thing is really just talking about next steps. So again, those projects remaining under 07 would be reappropriated in the 17 program. we would use all the remaining cash, the 169,000, and then cash after we've paid our encumbrances to pay Tarvin invoices. Those projects are going to be closed out to project savings as that occurs. And then moving forward, we'd have the Board of Trustees and or the Bond Advisory Committee working to establish what do we do with project savings. And I say and or the Bond Advisory Committee because this committee is really on the 17. We know we have savings from the 07 that there's not a committee overseeing, and so the board will have those conversations about what do we do with these funds moving forward. And then, you know, as I mentioned earlier, if you look at Larkspur, the line there, I can follow this. We've got it's showing a balance of 24 million. So that's going to be a real conversation. When that's closed out, that's a huge savings. So that's either 24 million that we don't sell in the future, or that's 24 million that is allocated somewhere. But right now, we haven't sold 169 million, so maybe it's the board's desire that we just don't sell that money. But we've been using money from different authorizations for the last several years, and so now I'm saying let's get rid of all the old money, let's start fresh, let's start clean, and let's move forward as we close out these projects.
Elaine, before we go much further, I realized I'm used to going board members, but of course, Heather, Petri, if y'all have something, please feel free to buzz in.
And that's all I have for you.
So I think my one comment is on your last statement is these savings as they come up. 2017 bonds were definitely, under election laws, were written very differently, and they were very specific. And we have a binder that we all work together on this project that, you know, it lays out a lot more specific things, and that's kind of the concerns that Jim and Aaron were pointing out earlier. And so I think it's a good practice that we don't buy those down, and then we do go back to the community for transparency, right? Because it's a savings under something that's written specific language. It's not as the language in 2007 where it's a little more flexible. And so I hope we can, you know, get 2007 and anything else cleaned up, used, spent. It shouldn't just be sitting in an account. And then I hope we can have the conversation that when we see savings, then we don't buy them and we project for the next round of bonds.
All right, anything else?
That's all I have.
Okay, so what's the next step from here?
Well, one thing is the Bond Advisory Committee charter says that there are some positions that are expiring at the end of this month, so that will be, I guess, on this month's agenda to discuss those members. Next steps are we use this cash and pay some bills and get back on track. In fact, today talked to some underwriters and financial advisor about refunding opportunities and, you know, discuss do we do a refunding on its own or with a new money sale. And so, you know, the market is still really attractive for refundings, and we have some callables coming up. So, you know, next step is to manage our project savings and then start determining what are the overall district needs, what are our resources available. I believe we're going into bond planning here pretty soon. And so there'll be a lot more discussions about future bonds, existing bonds, and then obviously some detailed conversations about what we do with these savings, because it's not just the small 3 to 6 million. We've got some larger balances from 2017 projects that are going to end up with some savings. And so we'll have to start having conversations about what we do with that.
Will the committee also consider if there's 2017 projects that are either completed or not going to get completed? Those will be on y'all's discussions as well?
Yes.
we've reached the end of our meeting here.
Do we have a list of our bond committee and our bond advisory committee and whose positions are, at an end? And, okay, just so we know and we can maybe reach out to them and say, you should stick around. There's going to be some fun stuff for y'all to do shortly.
I do have to ask those on the committee, it makes up equal representation of the district. So we have individuals who live in the north side, just asking.
The original bond advisory committee was made up of steering committee members, which were spread across the district on purpose. So that's who we invited to be in the bond advisory committee.
Yeah, I'd love to get a list of those members, please.
Okay.
I wonder, Jimmy, too, if you could put your hands on exactly what language the voters approved as it relates to these issues. I think it's useful for us to reference that. I think a number of points have been made about the specificity of the language in 2017 and going forward. I think that indicates a legislative priority. I think it also indicates an ideal, a standard for behavior of school boards, and one that I'd like us to try to reflect, even if we're talking about issuances that predate the change in the legislation. So having that reference language would be useful, I think.
Elaine, just pull that together and we'll get that to you.
Y'all are great over there. Thank y'all for joining us this evening. We really appreciate all the work you have done. Thank you for your contribution and dedication to our district and our students as well.
I will mention, we do have several bond advisory committee members watching due to COVID, and so they wanted to be here, but they couldn't due to COVID, so they just wanted to let you know. They appreciate their work.
Oh. Poor Petrie, I mispronounced your name, so that didn't... Oh, it is Petrie. I did it right first time. Oh, see? That's what last night when I was talking to our lawmaker, I did that as well. I mispronounced her name, and I knew it right in my head. And I was like, oh. All right. So Petrie and Heather, Jeff, I can't see from across the room. Jones, thank you. See? All right. Thank y'all very much for being here this evening. Thank you, Elaine and Jimmy, for getting this cleaned up. We really appreciate the immense amount of work that was done. I really enjoyed reading through the TASBO report, of seeing all the things we're doing to streamline and be very transparent going forward. That's vital and essential. So thank you. Thank you, board members. I think y'all have raised some really good points and discussion points, and we are going to have more work for us in the future. Without any objection, if there's nothing else before the board, we will adjourn. Thank you.